Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1448. Yeah. 1448. So what have we learned? We're learning, actually, it seems to me, as I said, this is an explanation of the Likutei Torah Hazinu, the Maimer of Kanesha Yoya Kanei, that was quoted in the previous page, that by the time of the Beis HaMikdash, or Mattan Torah and Beis HaMikdash, there was a Gilui that was equalized. Rina Shmiya, sight and sound. Like we learned at the bottom of the paragraph of last page. That's why they saw the sounds and they saw the sounds and saw the sounds and heard the sights. And the Rebbe Rashab is explaining because that's the Gili of Atzilus. In the context of what is he saying that? In the context of the Gili that comes not through Atzilus alone, Havaya Atzmai, but when it comes through the Malach, namely Matat, then it's already going through a filter. Even though Matat is a high level, but it's still a filter. So Yecheskel in the Golus, not during the Beis HaMikdash, after the Churban, after the destruction, he saw it through the Merkava. Like, same thing, Yeshua saw it through, received it through the Malach. Moshe, you could say, he was connected to Havaya Atzmai, but that's already like by Mattan Torah. But after the Chet HaEgel, then you'd have to go through a Malach. So the contrast here is what is the Gilead Lakus like without the Malach, without a Mamutza, straight Atzilus itself, and what is it like when it goes through some type of filter, some type of intermediary, as he calls it, Mamutza, and some Islapshus. So that's what we're learning here, which of course is critical to the whole central theme of Ayin Beis, all about interface. You know, we want to have, obviously, a connection straight to the highest levels. But you can't just jump there. It's like you can't look at the sun if you're not acclimated, if you're not trained. You need shades. You can't expose yourself and receive the highest levels of revelation if you're not a keli for it. And especially if there have been toxins and pollutants and all kinds of things that are impede and block the way. As we say, the shamas come down below, and especially in time of Golus. So that doesn't mean we don't have access. That's what he said earlier. Hashem still gives us access, but the question is whether it's direct or it's through stages, what he calls intermediaries, stepping stones. It's essentially the role of the Malachim, that when we speak about them, we talk about their tremendous love for God. It's like a role model. It's like an example. It's like when you see someone deeply inspired, it inspires you. So the Malachim serve as that siyua, that support system that inspires us when we're not so inspired or when things are concealed. We mention them, we talk about them in Birchas HaYetzer. And we see that their deep passion, whether it's the Srafim that are burning with passion, or the Chayes HaKodesh, or the Efanim, each in their own way, yearning, longing to connect to the divine, and that carries Ava V'Yira to us. Even though the Neshama's Ava V'Yira, as we've learned and will learn, is higher than Malachim. But the Neshama coming down below, it's concealed, especially in Golus. So here now we're learning, what does it taste like? What does it look like? What does it feel like when you're getting a direct Gilui from Atzilus itself? So what do we learn? That in Atzilus, it's a level that's higher than the Chalkus. That's what he says. It says like, Gilui Shem Atzilus Mamish, Yerid Hashem al Har Sinai, Lo Yischalkus Madregas. But 1 second, Atzilus is made up of Madregas. The whole point of Atzilus is 10 spheres. So what does that mean? There's no Ischalkus. So it says not Ischalkus Mamish. Because what dominates in Atzilus is not the distinctions. It's the Etzem Echad, as he says, like that one piece of silver. When you look at Atzilus, you see godliness. The godliness manifests, as he put it, in Keiches, Keich HaChochma, Keich HaBina. But it's Etzem Uhus Echad Mamish, Yesh Basara Keiches, Keich HaChochma, Keich HaBina. And the truth is, there are many examples for this. I gave a bunch of them, but I'll give another one. When you could see two people studying something, And one person looks at the details, they see all the details, they know the details. A person who has more of a trained eye sees the big picture, even though they're both looking at the same details. And you say, how does this person seeing something I don't see? We're both looking at the same thing because he's a trained eye. He'll be able to discern patterns, able to see the consequences. It's usually due to experience or deeper level of wisdom. So it's a matter. When Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, looked at the Mishkan, he looked at the vision of the Mishkan. What's the Mishkan? It's about the divine presence, Shekhinah, dwelling among the people. So what did Moshe say to Bezalel? Build the Kalim first. The Aron, the Menorah, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach, etc. When Bezalel heard that, and then he said to him, and then build a structure around it, the Yeriyes, the walls, the skins, and so on. So Bezalel says to Moshe, one second, that's not the way of the world. That's not the order. First you build a building, then you bring in the furniture. First you build a building, and then you bring in the Aron and the Menorah and the rest of the Kelim. And Moshe says, you're right. Do it the way you're saying. So the question is asked, what's going on? Moshe didn't know that. It's common sense. It's true, Bezalel was the architect. But Moshe was the visionary and Bezalel was the architect. The visionary sees the end in mind. He's talking about the purpose. The purpose of the mission is the Kalim. To house the Kalim, you need a structure. But the purpose, he goes right to the purpose. It's like similar to what it says in Pasha Bahar. When you start reading, when you'll come to the land, you shall rest the land, Shabbos Lashem, the mitzvah of Shemitah. And then he says, Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, v'sheish shanim tizmer kamecha. 6 years you should sow the fields and plant the kamecha, the vines, the vineyards. And then B'shana Hashvi is the 7th year, you should rest the land. Ask the Alter Rebbe, what's the redundancy? The first thing they have to do is 6 years working the land. Then comes Shabbos. Why does he begin by saying, as soon as you enter the land, Shabbos Lashem, Shavashav Sa'aretz? So he answers, because the first thing you need to know is the purpose. What's the kavanah of your working 6 years is to bring godliness into this world, Shabbos. So he begins with the kavanah. Then he says, technically speaking, you start with Sunday, and then Monday, and then Tuesday, or year 1, year 2, year 3. So it's really two perspectives on something. Atzilus, when you look at Atzilus, you see God's purpose in existence. When you look at Asiya, you don't see that. We look at a world, we see trees, we see birds, we see human beings, we see a multitude of creatures, millions, billions, trillions of different creatures, cells, and so on. Yes, it's all very designed nicely and beautifully, but you don't see the purpose, you don't see the vision. You need to work on that. You need to either be told, you learn the Torah, or your teacher tells you, or you learn it through a process of elimination. You come to discover there's deeper purpose in it all. In Atzilus, we see existence for what it's meant to be, not just for what it is. So of course there's Chachma Bina Das in Atzilus, because the structure of existence consists of that. But what you experience is the Etzem Echad, the vision of the divine. That's why it's called the world of unity. It's the vision of existence. Whenever I do workshops on Atzilus B'riyah, I always say, whenever you build anything, a business plan, an architect building a building, a composer composing music, an author writing a book, you name it, anything you do always begins vision first. One unified singular vision. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to get? What do you want to get done? Then you begin B'riyah, an outline. You start breaking down the outline, not the executive summary, the outline. Then you flesh out the outline. You take the headlines, the categories, you break them down to subcategories. That's Yitzira. Then comes Asiya, the fully finished product, full dimensional product, the finished. Seif Maisa b'machshavet chila. The end product is what arose b'machshavet chila in Atzilus or higher. So Atzilus represents that singular vision. So there's Eschalkus, but not Eschalkus mamish, because it's not really about the focus on the details. It's all about that one entity and how it's expressed itself. It's like when a person has a mission in life, then their life is not made up of fragments. All the details are spokes connected by the hub of their mission. If a person doesn't have a mission, then your life is led by totally circumstantially. Whatever comes your way, you respond to this one, to that one. Sometimes there's some cohesiveness, sometimes there isn't. Many of us are wandering, looking, why am I here, etc. So Atzilus is that vision mission statement, so to speak. That's the Achdus. And that's why, even though it's made up of Eris and Kalim, the Kalim are part of the Eir, like he said, Hadein Kamsa, Levushim Minei Abei, Akol Etzem Echad. Higher than Atzilus, you don't even have structure yet. There's no Chachma Bina. Like he said in Keser, it's like the Ratzon for Chachma, the Ratzon for Bina. In Atzilus, there is a structure, but the structure is permeated with the united vision. But in Atzilus, there's Bechinas Madregas Nevdalis. And the last piece we learned, V'yashleimer bedugma Bechinas Akudim. He went to Akudim, which are 10 energies in one container, bound in one container. So there's no ischalkos, because they're all one container. U'makol mokim hem eser eris. And nevertheless, there are 10 energies. So initially, in the last class, I suggested that Akudim is higher than Atzilus. When I read it closer, it looks like he's bringing Akudim as a dugma for Atzilus. Even though it's obviously not Atzilus, because Atzilus is 10 energies in 10 containers, which is why I initially thought he's talking more about higher than Atzilus. But I think the Yesh Leimer that he's saying is a dugma for either. Well, let's see how he finishes it. But I don't want to conclude till we see how he comes back to Atzilus. But regardless, Akudim is definitely an example. We have 10 energies, but one container. So we'll see where this goes. We're in the middle of it. And I'm going to continue now from a Muvur B'Mokem Acher. Middle of around a third down the page, the line Hiskalkus Mokom Mokem Hein Esa Eres. Before I continue, anybody wants to ask anything about what I've said right now as a summary? Obviously, the topic is not over, so there's more coming. It's not like a finished topic, so I'm sure that things become more clear as we go. But just in case somebody wants some clarity about anything.
I just wonder if Akudim is like Tohu. Is it
No,
all
Akudim is not Tohu. I explained Tohu is called Nikudim. Tohu is 10 energies and 10 containers that are not compatible with each other, so it creates tension. Akudim is a higher level. It's 10 energies in one container. So there's no tension there. There's no shattering of containers. No.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's continue. We're in the middle of Akudim. We'll see where he goes with this. So the line begins, is Chalkus page 1448. And those that want to follow the text, you can find it at ayinbeis.com. There you have scanned PDFs of these pages. It's explained elsewhere. That this is similar to what it says in the Mishnah, in chapter 9 of Menachos. It's actually chapter 10. I looked this up and I did a little research on this topic. But I'm just wondering whether in some editions of Menachos, maybe chapter 9, chapter 10 come together. But it's the second Mishnah in chapter 10, at least in the Menachos that we have before us. So what does he bring there? He talks about measurement. So he says like this: Shnosus hoye bihin, at kan lepar, at kan la'ayel. It's interesting. Hin is a measure. Think of it like a measuring tube. So he's talking there, how did they measure, where it says in the Beis Hamikdash, they had to bring different measures, like a certain amount of, like, times a half of hin. Hin is like I believe a hin is like maybe 100 liters or something like that. It's a big measure. But there's a half a hin, there's a third, there's a quarter. So how'd they measure? How'd they know how to measure? Like, when you, for example, you cook. So you have, in any recipe, it tells you half a teaspoon, a complete teaspoon, a quarter teaspoon, or tablespoon, or whatever it is. So there were measures they had tubes. They had different ways of measure. So hin is a measure. So he says shnosis means a gradation. Shnosis means etches. It's like when you ever see like a thermometer has lines. So that's how they knew. So if the hin went all the way to the top, the top line was of complete hin. Hin again is a measurement. It's a large measurement. If there was a line atkan le par, a par I think was a quarter of a hin. An ayel was a half a hin, or a third of a hin. I'm not sure. I have to look it up. But basically, shnosis means in etches or engravings, like lines that were engraved in this measure. So they knew and that's how they measured. They knew how much, where it reached. Like you see this also. You see it in today when you have what do they call them? Like for cooking, you have these measuring tools, tubes or containers.
Measuring cup.
Measuring cups. Yeah, stuff like that. So what do you see? So that's an example given that he says like this. So even though there are lines there that tell you different measures, whether it's a part of a hin, a complete hin, and so on, think of it a quart, a liter, a gallon, and so on, but it's all part of one container. That's an example given for Akudim. 10 energies in one container. So it's only one container. You don't have 10 containers. One container, one measuring that has different lines etched in it. So it's 10 within one, so to speak. So that's the example given for Akudim. Now, I actually went to search, where's this Mavur b'Mokem Acher? Because I don't remember seeing it in Chassidus, Chabad at least. That doesn't mean it's not there. I just didn't find it. So I didn't do an aggressive search in all my Morim. If you want to look it up and somebody wants to find it, by all means. But I did find it in some places. I found it, number one, in Isaac Humler. It's called Isaac Humler. Yitzchak Epstein was his name. It's a very big chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Mittler Rebbe, and even of the Alter Rebbe. And he wrote a bunch of Sfarim. One of the Sfarim is called Maimer HaShiflus VaSimcha. It's a discourse, an essay on Shiflus, on Bittul and Simcha and joy. So the end of chapter 15, he brings this example. It would be surprised to me if the Rebbe Rashab is referring to that, because generally when he says Mavur Mokem Acher, would probably be in Chassidus from the Rabbeim, not from a Chassid. So I don't think he means that, but it could be that Isaac Humler heard it from the Alter Rebbe or he heard it from other Rabbeim. I haven't found it yet in print, and I looked a while. Just putting it out there, if somebody wants to do a little research, by all means, maybe you'll find something. I did find it in the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lutzato, who's a Makubal, but usually, again, he would probably not be what the Rebbe Rashab is referring to. And that's the places I found it so far. And as I said, that's an example given for Akudim. So what do you see from that? There's 10 measures in one keli. Now, like he said, everything is one etzem. There's no real distinctions. The fact that you have lines, yes, there's distinction in that one of how much you should give. That's the example given. Now, when we talk higher than the world of Akudim, there it's not even possible to say, it's completely out of the realm to say that there are 10 energies. There's no 10 energies even. 10 energies are already in Akudim. I gave the example of one cell, when a cell upon conception, it's one cell, but it has all the details in it. Why he doesn't bring that example, I don't know. Like a seed. But regardless, it could be because there maybe he feels it's already you can't see them, but there may be details in there. Not sure exactly. But regardless, higher than Akudim, there's not even 10 energies. It's only Achdus. Here there's at least 10 energies, but they're all in one container. Kamoy Kain Yesh Leimer. And here's where I say, I think that he's trying to bring example. Kamoy Kain Yesh Leimer, that before he brought the level of Keser, Rotzen for a Chachma, Rotzen being this taka higher than Atzilus. Now he says, Kamoy Kain Yesh Leimer. Kamoy Kain like what? Like Akudim. That's same thing. You can say that Atzilus, Ima Yeshem B'chinas Eres B'Kelim, even though Atzilus is not Akudim, it has Eres in Kelim, meaning 10 energies in 10 containers. Nevertheless, it has something in common with Akudim, that it's one etzem mahus echad. Obviously, it's not the same thing because Akudim is not Atzilus. That's not what he's saying. He's just coming to explain that you could have something that has 10, but it's really part of one. So in Atzilus, it's on a lower level, but the same concept, that what dominates is the etzem echad. That's what it looks like he's saying here. Not that he's saying that Akudim is higher than Atzilus, where you don't have his chalkus. He's bringing Akudim as an example for Atzilus. As I said, initially, I didn't teach it that way. But now when I read it, it sounds to me far more likely what I'm saying now. And this is why Atzilus is called the world of unity. Like it says in Zayar, Hashem is one with his chayui, with the Eiris, and he's one with his structure, with the Gamui are the Kalim. Shakolu b'chinas achdus mamish, chad. Here the focus is on the word chad. Even though it says twice, meaning the achdus is different, the Eiris and the Kalim, like we learned elsewhere, earlier, but still it's all one. That's achdus mamish. V'agam, and though the mechulokim heim b'maylosan u'madreigosan, and even though the very levels of the spheres, including the Eiris and the Kalim, Chayu v'Gamui, are distinguished in their quality and in their level, u'kamoishin is bar le'il, like we learned earlier, Makom mokim heim b'bchinas achdus. Nevertheless, they're in a unified state, which you can explain, like I said earlier, like the vision is what dominates, and even the very levels themselves, their focus is not on their distinction, their focus is how they work together as one. I was going to come explain it now with a human example and then come back to Mattan Torah. Well, let me stop here if anybody wants any clarity on any topic, any questions. I think it's pretty clear. The Yesh Leimer, continuing on, we can say, Al derech moshel ba'adam lamata. Like, for example, in the human being below us. The power to see, the power of vision, and the power of sound to hear are separate and divided among them from one another. The Beriya lo yesh shmiya. Riya does not include listening. A person could be seeing and he could be deaf, God forbid. He could see something and not hear something. Ubishmiya lo yesh riya. And in shmiya, there's no riya. They're two separate functions that work side by side. They can work together. They can be coordinated, but they're two separate functions, two separate faculties. Ubepnimiyusam, the Rebbe Rashab in his thoroughness is qualifying. Internally, hem kshurim u'miyachadim zeh imzeh, I should say. They're bound and united and connected with each other. Those, when we say they're two, is when they come as actual faculties, there's two different faculties. In their pnimius, they're bound together, and that's why they can work with each other. Like when you see something and you hear something while at the same time, they speak to each other, so to speak. And a deeper level, they are kshurim u'miyachadim. But as they come into a human being's actual faculties, the ears are not the eyes. And the eyes are not the ears. Or the vision, the power of vision is not the power of hearing, and the power of hearing is not the power of vision. That's lamata. Ubesharshan, in their root.
What does it mean?
Hold on. We're middle of learning this. Let's finish reading the whole piece, and I'll try to explain, and then we'll take questions. Ubesharshan, in their root, Hainu b'cheich hachachma b'keich habina. So we know Riya is rooted in Chachma and Shmiya and Bina. So that's the root of Riya and Shmiya in the spiritual levels. Hagam shezeh Chachma v'zeh Bina. Even though Chachma and Bina, this is Chachma and this is Bina, Mekol Mokim habina klula b'Chachma. Bina is encompassed within Chachma, v'chachma bebina. And chachma is encompassed within bina. You don't say that by riyah and shmiyah. You don't say there's riyah within shmiyah, shmiyah within riyah in our actual faculties. But in their root, you do say shezeh inyan haven b'chachma v'chachma bebina. There's an expression haven b'chachma that there's bina within chachma, and there's chachma within bina. We learned about this at the end of volume 2. So what do you see from this? You see that when you start going deeper into the core of the faculties, they begin encompassed with each other. So let me explain this a bit more. So look, I mentioned, for example, the development of a fetus. It begins with one cell that then splits and splits and splits. At the end of the process, you have a child with 248 limbs and 365 sinews, and all the details of a full structure. The fact of the matter is that in its earlier stages, these details were all part of one thing before it branched out. So even though it's a full cohesive one unit of a child, but they in their deeper levels, they're all part of one thing. So the same thing we've talked a number of times, koiches gluyim. If someone says use your hands to write something, that's then different than using your mouth to eat, or using your ears to hear, or using your eyes to see. They're different faculties. A person could have perfect hearing, and their vision may be impaired, and they need to get help for their vision, or vice versa. One does not replace the other, and one does not encompass the other. But when you go into the koiches, not nelomim, you go into the koiches hiyulim, I would say koiches atzmim, the root of these faculties in the nefesh, then they're far closer to each other. In other words, in the external expression, they're separate. When you go into the inner wiring, those wires are much closer to each other, which is why we have the concept of synesthesia, that there are people who see sounds and hear sights. We're going to learn about Mattan in a moment. But bottom line is, he's saying is that when you go into the inner faculties, Chachma and Bina, the root of sound, of sight and sound, there is Golus. There's the sight within sound and the sound within that. The Chachma within Bina, and Bina within Chachma, and the Chachma within Bina. That's not expressed in the usual functionary faculties that we have. That's what he's saying. What I'm not clear about is how's that different from Pnimiyusam as opposed to B'sharsham. Because the parentheses, he said, Pnimiyusam, they're bound and united with one another. Here he's saying in their root, they're klula, they encompass one another. So I think the difference would be, Pnimiyusam is talking more that when you start thinking about it, that sight and sound have a relationship with each other. They talk to each other. You know, you see something, and then you hear something at the same time. These are like two faculties that communicate with each other, and that's why they're bound with each other. Sharsham is talking much more in their root wiring, that when they begin Chachma and Bina, even though they're two separate entities, but there's a Bina within Chachma and a Chachma within Bina. Very brief, but that's what it seems like he's saying here about this. Now he's going to bring this back. This is Lamata Ba'odam. What's the example that he's giving here? That Atzilus would be how it is B'sharsham. No, it's lower than Atzilus. It's distinct, the faculties. But in Atzilus, it's Etzem Echad, even though it has different faculties, but it's like Chachma and Bina, the Sharsham of Shmiya and Riyah. And there is overlap and in Skalulus, we can say. So before I continue, please, if you have any questions.
You're saying Pnimiusam is Sharsham.
I said Pnimiusam is not Sharsham. I made a distinction.
Right, the difference is, Ulai Shleima, we see that someone who does not hear well or doesn't hear at all, he has extra power in seeing. And the other way around, somebody who's blind has extra power in hearing. maybe because it's the same shoresh, since it's taken from the same shoresh. So let's say the eyes are closed, he can't see, so the energy is going more towards his ears.
Maybe.
We learned it before once that actually there is someone who could play music and he's deaf.
Right. There's a lot to say about this. I think I would go back to the beginning in Ayin Beis. I mentioned it the other day, around chapter 20, 15, 20 approximately, maybe earlier. No, earlier, I think. 12 maybe, where he talks about Re'inus Hanishma by Mattan Torah. I think it's maybe helpful to look there to understand some of this, because he elaborates more of how things are in their source. Now, it makes total sense, especially when you're familiar with physics. When you go to the subatomic structure of things, there's something in common about all matter and existence, that they're connected, even though fire and water, for example, are very different, or oxygen and hydrogen are different. When you go into a quantum-like state, or even subatomic state, they become far more similar, because they haven't yet taken on shape and form. It's like they're still in an amorphous, nebulous state before it's actually developed. So you could give it, there are examples for this, especially the higher you go, the more you see this. Remember, Atzilus reigns supreme here because Atzilus is the ultimate interface between structure and beyond structure. Once you go higher than Atzilus, especially higher than Akudim, then you're talking more things are completely oneness, seamless, or not completely, but almost completely. Atzilus is the perfect meeting place and interface between the Achdus and the structure. That's why it's so critical that he's speaking about Atzilus here. This was discussed a lot in volume 1, the role of Atzilus in that sense. But now he's going to go back to Mattan Torah. It says like this now. So that's the Adam Lamata. The Imba Adam Lamata, says the Rebbe Rashab. If this is the case with a human being below, the Imba Adam Lamata who came, if this is the case by a human below, the distance between the root, Chochmah and Bina, and that which branches off from the root, that which extends from the root, which is Riyah Shmiyah, the B'shoshen hem klulim u'miyochodim, that their root, they're klulim, they're interconnected and united. By Stifus, hen shtei keiches nefrodim. And Stifus is when they branch out. They're two separate faculties, sight and sound. If that's the case by a human being even, how the Yuvam is at the Atzilus. From this we understand that Atzilus, Hagam she'en chochma bina, ein ha-chochma b'mitzias chochma, v'lo ha-bina b'mitzias bina. So basically, if by Adam it's that way, how much more so in Atzilus? It doesn't say kol shken v'kal v'chemen, but it's understand that Atzilus, even though there is Chochmah and Bina, Chochmah is not Bina, Chochmah is not really the Metzias of Chochmah, meaning the structure, the definition of Chochmah, and Bina is not the Metzias of Bina. They're in total unification in that place. Again, you need to understand both sides, because they're still called Chochmah and Bina, but the focus is not on the Chochmah and Bina, but on the unity among them. The vision, the divine vision in each of them. As I explained it before, or if you want to go with explanation, let's say with the Akudim explanation. I mean, it's all part of the same concept. Okay, now that we know this, that's what's in Atzilus, now we'll understand the Likutei Torah Shir Hashirim. Hazinu, sorry. Likutei Torah Hazinu, Knesset. U'lechein, now he's going back to what he began. Remember the beginning of the paragraph from the bottom of page 1447? He said the Gili by Mattan Torah was the Gili Atzilus Mamish. Lamata, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. That's why Sheminus Anira v'Re'inus Anishma. Or Re'inus Anishma v'Sheminus Anira. So now he goes back and finishes where he began. U'lechein by Mattan Torah. And that's why by Mattan Torah, Shehayir b'chinas Atzilus, when Atzilus was radiating, shining, Hoyerei mesanishma, they saw the sounds, v'shemim in asanira, and they heard the sights. Bli shum ischalkus klal. That's the language from the Likutei Torah, without any ischalkus. Yeah, bli shum ischalkus, liba madregas. That's the Likutei Torah, the bottom of the paragraph, last page, the end of the paragraph. Because of this level of the Achdus of Atzilus. But Ayin Beis is boily ill. This is, I think, where he's referring to volume 1 early on, the Inyan Re'enes Hanishma. I think he's referring to that because I don't remember it being discussed. It may have been discussed in other places in Ayin Beis, but I think he's referring back to that chapter. Is it chapter 12? Did anyone look it up? I think it's around there. Maybe a little later. Okay. U'kamoy kain, and so too was it, in the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood. One second. Yeah, that's also from the Likutei Torah, Beis Hamikdash. Hoyu hanashamas b'mayla el yena, the neshamas were on a high level, on a high quality level. And their power of comprehension. In the revelation of the divine, in the general vitality or energy of the divine, again, change the tone a bit. Their Gilead Lakus was the Klolos HaChayis, not the details. They were plugged in to the core chayis, which means Hainu Etzem Atzilus. The Etzem of Atzilus, like you said earlier, Etzem Er Atzilus, not the Havaya Atzmei, not through Memutza. And their revelation was without interfaces, without intermediaries. This is the same language he used back on page 1445. He called it Etzem Er Atzilus.
By the way, it's chapter 19 in
okay,
Chelik
19.
Aleph.
Okay, good. Chapter 19. Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to look it up myself. I think it could help understand this piece a bit better. Please, I'm sorry.
Quickly, what's the difference between Mattan Torah and Beis Hamikdash? I mean, Mattan Torah was higher, wasn't it, than the Giloim?
Here he's not distinguishing. Here he's comparing the two. The Maimorim compare the two here. He's not coming to explain the difference between Mattan Torah and Beis Hamikdash. He's saying both of them in general are this. Is there a difference? There's probably a difference. He's just not distinguishing it here. He's just saying, Kamoy Kain, a Gilead Atzilus, Bli Shum Amtsayis. There was the Gilead of Elikus, Er Atzilus, without any intermediary. Vayagili Kamoy Shahu. And the Gilead was as it was, without any filters. Mashenkin Golus. Now he's going back to Yecheskel and Golus in general. By contrast, in Golus, after the destruction of the temple, this is back to the top of page 1447. Well, Ani, the Geila, what he says, Ani b'teicha Geila, Yecheskel speaking, I am from among those in Golus and in exile. She says, in Golus, in Negila Ashkina Yecheskel, the revelation of the divine presence to Yecheskel was through a multitude of different levels. Manifesting. So first of all, many levels, manifesting in Pnei Aryeh, the face of the lion, face of the bull, the ox. This is also from the language of the Likutei Torah, Kenesher. Yeah. So there's this Chalkas HaMadregas. not Atzilus. The energy, the vision of Atzilus was not radiating directly to Yecheskel. It was through these levels. The Bizman Beis Hamikdash Kayom, in the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood, the temple stood, Hoyu Anashamas B'mayla Al Yena. The Neshamas were on a high level. Actually, I read this before. I must have skipped some lines. Okay, but I went over it all again. Fine. So they were on a high level, and the power of their comprehension was in the Golus HaChayis, in the main artery, if you wish. In the general divine energy there, Hainu Etzem Atzilus, the core of Atzilus. So do both things. It was the Golus HaChayis, not in the details. And the Gili was without Memutzayim, without interfaces, without intermediaries. But when the first temple was destroyed, and they were exiled and dispersed to Babylon, the Gili came only through Malchus. Because it says Gola Bavel, Gola Shchina Imoim. That when they went to Bavel, the Shchina went with them. But that's already the level of the Shchina, like we learned Kutchebricha v'Shchinta. Kutchebricha Zah, Havaya Atzmei. But the Shchina is already Malchus, so this is how it's going through Malchus. V'hoya, and that Gili was also Yerida B'Islapshus, was through a descent and manifestation b'chayis hamerkava, in the creatures or the faces of the merkava, uberiba hischalkus, and with a multitude of levels. So now it's branched into many specific details. Like we said by the Odom already, Shmiya and Riya are two different faculties now. They're not overlapping. They're not crossing wires. And through these levels, the divine flow, flowed into the neshama. Because remember, the neshama now has come down to below. The neshama that is in its root, higher than everything, is concealed. The neshama below, that's why the neshama receives its ava v'yira, receives the energy through the malachim. So he's saying, once it comes through Yecheskel, Yitzira, through like he said, through all these levels, so through these levels, Nimshach the Shefa to the Neshama, the Mechol Ba'ava, the angel Mechol draws Ba'ava, his Ava, from his love, comes to the love of the Neshamas below, the Gavriel B'Yira, and Gavriel in Yira, like we learned this earlier, quite a few pages back. We spoke about the difference between these different angels. It was a while back. We first began the whole discussion of Malachim on page 1427. Okay, so he's going now back to the Malachim. The Kamoy Kain Aviyira ben Neshama. And so too the Aviyira and the soul, he mekabelas ayideh Malachim. It receives through the malachim. I have directed malachim toward you to protect you. What? Al kapayim yasunecha, on their kapayim, on their arms, on their hands, they will carry you. You will be carried. Their palms, you will be carried. What did you want to say?
No, it said lishmoncho and yisauncho.
Yeah. Pirush, what does that mean? Ki malochiv yisavelecha liyas mashpia lecha. I've appointed, basically, I've commanded, I've directed malachim to be mashpia, to transmit to you. Vehem yisanucha, yasunecha.
Yisauncho.
How do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it?
Yisa'uncho.
Yisa'uncha. Okay. Shal yoda misnasas umisalas haneshama. Through these malachim, the neshama gets carried and elevated. The face of the lion, the level of love, that's malach machol. And pnei sher is yira, is gevura. Arya is chesed, sher is yira. So the pnei sher b'madregas hayira. So you see here that the neshamas are receiving. Now remember, he said this all before. Neshamas as they are in Golus. That's Bizman HaGolus. But even without Zman HaGolus, the neshamas below can use the support. They get the support from the malachim, as we learned earlier. And with that, he concludes here this paragraph on the bottom of page 1447. Any questions?
Yeah.
Does this go ahead, Rabbi Taiso.
The neshama is higher than the malachim. So what does it mean that they are getting? I know it's Bizman HaGolus, it's Lemato, but Bishalsham, they are higher.
Is this the first time you're hearing that malachim are, that the neshamas are getting from malachim, even though they're higher than the malachim?
No, it's not the first time, but I don't understand exactly. The neshama is a chelik kol kamemal. I know
since maybe somebody in the class can help, maybe, because to me, this has been the theme for the last 20 pages. And I'm happy to go over it again, but maybe somebody wants to put it in words that Rav Shlomo could understand better.
Could you just say it in one sentence? I understand it very clearly, but it bothers me because
Let me ask you something. Let me ask you. How's your Ava V'yira these days? You have a neshama. You're a chelik elokam imal mamash. How's your Ava V'yira? I mean, you don't have to expose all the details, but is it really like burning, fiery passion by davening, by day, Avos Hashem, when you say V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha? How's it working out for you?
This is the Golus. It's not in the way. So what's a if they
one second. So go back to the page 1444, and he says, Hine zesh haneshamas mekablim avi yishlam al dei malachim zeu bizman hagolus. So there's your answer. That's your basic answer. Even without that, it's more than that. But you wanted a short answer. That's the short.
This was my question.
If you want a longer answer, I would advise just take a little time and just go back to page. It starts on page 1408, I believe, where he really starts the whole discussion. But if you really want to see it clearly, I'd go to 1408. But specifically, let me tell you to go here, where he really spells it out very strongly. And not only that, just a second, let me just give you the right pages so you can look it up yourself. Page 1426, where he says it explicitly. Hagam sheneshamis Yisrael are higher than malachim, very higher. What would you be if you take a piece of food in your mouth and you don't have a digestive system? What do you think is going to happen? God forbid, a person will die from hunger. So he explained there at length the Mayai, why you need Mayai, because the Ein Sof, and that's even without Golus. And then finally, I refer you to the bottom of page 1443. 1443. So I gave you three sources so far. Yesh lohavim ma'achas shebekrish magim. Why Lamed Tzrichim Yisrael lekabel aviyira from malachim when malachim are lower than neshama? So he asked this question explicitly. So let me explain something. I have no problem that we need to go over it again and again and again, but I could only explain it once, twice, 10 times. But it's mamish the maimorim. So I would suggest that if you really want to understand, I'd go back to these pages, take a little time and read them again. I do that all the time. Why everyone thinks I just get it the first time? It's not correct. When you hear me teaching here, especially as we go along, I learn these things sometimes 10, 20, 30 times. So I can't do it for you. I could give you a summation of it. I can explain it inside. But the question you're asking is not a side question. This is the question that Rebbe Rashab is asking, is the very essence of this whole piece here. So now he's adding that in Zman Golus, it's obviously much easier to understand. But even before Zman Golus, he also explained it earlier. That's why we say Birchus Yetzer before Shema.
My question related to one of the last things. By the way, Rav Teichel, it says also supposedly Mihem Mikabel Neshamas Siwa, but of Rasam, that the angels are giving the Neshamas assistance because they've fallen so lowly that the angels are providing assistance in connecting us with our source originally. So it's where our source, the Neshamas are rooted higher, but because they fall so low, they essentially lose a certain capability to connect with their source, and that's where the Malachim have a mila, an advantage over us. Because in reality they're higher than us. Our source is higher than the Malachim, but in Golus, our reality is lower than the Malachim. I don't know if that helps any, but that's how I've understood this so far.
Anyway, I would suggest going back to reading it all. Okay, what's your question?
The last sentence, let me go. I moved to that sentence I read for Rabbi Teichel. The inyan of getting Av and Mira from the Neshama, from the Malachim, the suggestion that we need a Mamutza interface in order to have love and fear of God. You're saying that to the extent I can say I love God or fear God, to the extent I can, in my 49th Madrega of Asiya, to the extent I can say I love God or I fear God, I'm not really feeling the love for God himself, but rather there's an angel who's essentially helping me feel that. So even whatever limited connection I have itself is not even really connection to the Eibishter, but rather a malach is serving as a mamutza, as an intermediary.
That's not what a mamutza means. If you go into a shul or you watch the Rebbe in a video davening or leading a niggin, and you get inspired inside you because he's leading the sin, you see his passion. So it's contagious and makes you feel passionate. He's not doing it for you. He's helping ignite it in you. That's what mamutza here means. Malachim are role models, are examples. They're like shluchim. They're like examples that when you read, you hear about their great dispilus of godliness. It's like when you go, let's say, to the king's palace, or people Chassidim came to see a Rebbe, and they saw Chassidim was so enamored and so mesmerized by the whole scene, that all created a mood that ignited the Av v'Yira within their soul. The Haftas Shem Elokecha, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha is you as an individual. But to help ignite that, we say Yetzer. I thought that was obvious, but okay, that's simple, Paul Batzer's way to understand it.
Yeah, no, that's how I had understood. But then he says it here directly. It's Al Yidei Malachim, so
he said it probably 20 times already, just for the record.
Yeah, maybe this
keep
time
saying it all the time. He says yes.
This time it hit me over the head.
I mean, 1 second. Do you understand how the 10 faculties of a human being come from the 10 divine attributes?
Of course, yeah.
So the same idea. So just as the divine attributes in Atzilus evolve into the levels, they evolve us into the malachim, and from the malachim they evolve to us.
One other
among
question
other things that he's explained before.
One other question I've had for multiple classes now, I keep forgetting to ask, is that we talk about here the yichud of. I mean, ultimately, there's an Indian of the yichud of kudsha, brichu, and shchinta. I mean, that's where we came from. We're here now because we came from there, and the malachim help us do that. But you say that the kudsha is we're trying to connect zah. I guess, and I don't know if that's zah of Atzilus or zah of Keser. That was a little unclear to me. But my question is, why isn't it mochin? Why is it zah? The highest in any olam is mochin. It's not zah. So I don't understand why. If you
go back to page 1436, he explained kudsha bricha v'shchinta, I think, on 12 different levels. Zah and malchus. Then he explained chachma and bina, Keser and mochin. He spoke it on all levels, so it's on all levels.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'll stop here. Bottom of the paragraph on page 1448. And again, I would recommend go back and read, even read loosely or heavily as you see fit. It says it's a lot of material here that's going on now, as I said, from page 1408. We're now at 1448, 40 pages. Then we started with the Malachim. I've done many summaries, how the neshamas are above and how the neshamas are below. He spoke about explicitly there are two levels of neshamas, and how we need the eye, as it comes into the physical eye, we need an outside light to illuminate, to help us see. Even though be'etzem, the eye could see without light, but that's only be'etzem, that's only in its core root. I'm just trying to jog your memories that these are ideas that have been discussed for quite a while. But I'll continue to review, try to sum it up. I think there are a few classes, especially sometimes on Sunday, where I make an overview of the entire last 40 pages or 50 pages or more. And remember also, this all comes part of the section that began on page 1350. After speaking hundreds of pages about tefillah, how through Torah Oir, the Torah, from the top down, that Torah Oir gives us the power to connect the two. Even though he's talking Allah and Amshacha, that's both Mamayla Lamata, Mat Lamayla, but that's also a big part of this whole conversation. Because you could ask the same question, if I may, why does a neshama need Torah? You're asking why it needs Malachim. Why does it need Torah? It's rooted higher than Torah. Neshama is rooted higher than Torah. He made it very clear earlier. Why does it need Moshe Rabbeinu? Kairach said, Kol ha'edik deishim him. The whole nation are holy. Madua tisnasu. What do we need a Moshe? Why do we need a Aaron? Why do we need a Rebbe? Why do we need Torah? Why do we need anything? Neshama is rooted in the highest levels. If you can answer that question, you'll answer also the question of Malach. It's all part of the big picture here. Okay. So we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph, page 1448. And